one person in particular that we meet a little bit later in Justice USA is Keith Thomas, and it was so striking that with Tristan Williams, whose mom and a lot of his family comes, Caleb Williams' mom and other people come when he gets released. Uh, Teresa has a boyfriend that helps and doesn't help, etc. But with Keith Thomas, after seeing the support that a lot of the people had, Zachary Brill as well, Keith Thomas, when he gets released, there's literally no one there. And then you guys show him in Justice USA sitting on the curb. I assume it's his girlfriend he's talking to, and she's like, "Oh, sorry, I was asleep." So it's just like that was very powerful. So as a person and as a filmmaker, I mean, you're experiencing this is someone's real life that they're going through. How do you balance that uh, super powerfulness of the actual reality of it, but then the powerfulness of a film, TV series?
Well, I'll say this, it's really hard, right? It's really hard as a human being, if you're a decent human being, which I like to think that I am, to see somebody struggle, to see somebody who doesn't know what their next move is. And, it's like you said, Nashville is not a huge city, but it's a city. And Keith had very little means when he got out of jail. He's a kid who was going to school, working very hard, had mental health issues, working multiple jobs, just to scratch by. And so an incident where he goes to jail is going to throw all of that out of whack. And so, that is one of the more poignant scenes in the film. And it's a scene I remember very well, filming it. And what you do as a filmmaker is you realize that telling this person's story can actually help someone else. And, I don't think anybody on our crew was immune to feeling all of the feels for all of these people. I think we were an emotionally tight knit group and we discussed their cases and we befriended a lot of these people. So I think with Keith, there was a level of comfortability with our crew to be vulnerable like that. I think you see that with a lot of different characters in our series, this level of vulnerability that you just don't expect to see. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's very hard. There's no other way to put it. I mean, there are other scenes with Keith that were actually harder in the film to witness. Um, there's allegations made by him that law enforcement held him down. And so obviously that's triggering for a lot of people. And, there's an interesting scene in the film that I don't really want to give away because it's so powerful and so impactful, where Keith kind of gets to see firsthand his own reality. And it's really, really powerful. And that was one of the three toughest scenes that we had to film, in my opinion.
And that's the one where he's in his attorney's office.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that one was jarring on many, many levels. And that brings up another question throughout Justice USA. You show obviously several people that you follow throughout the series, or at least a few episodes, whatever it ends up being for each person. But you also show a lot of different people. One guy I remember who was talking to Zachary Brill, who gets released, but is an older black man with a thick beard.
Yeah, LaTroy.
But how did people in the conversation when you're approaching them to be interviewed or not, or on camera, or their story being told, what were the reasons that people wanted to do it and didn't want to be featured?
I've never actually thought about why people wanted to do it. I think our approach was literally we would spend Fridays and Saturday nights at the jail, and then a couple days during the week in other places, maybe the courts, um, or other jails. But the downtown jail, we would be there Fridays and Saturday nights from
Why
6
Fridays and
p.m.
why Fridays
Well,
and
that's when most people are arrested for obvious reasons, alcohol, drugs, being out of work, but we would be there from, 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock to about 3 o'clock in the morning. And every time somebody came through the Sally Port doors, which is just these large concrete steel doors, it's like they open the door and that person, what they see is our crew. And so imagine how shocking that is for that person. But then imagine that, after they get processed, like we don't talk to them before they're processed, really. and sometimes our crew would be in the Sally Port with them. So these people don't know what's going on. But right after they're processed, we would go talk to them and say, "Hey, here's who we are. Here's what we're trying to do. Would you like to tell your story?" I mean, it was a very simple approach with integrity and the right intentions. And, more people said yes than I thought would, honestly. I mean, you're talking about people being in their lowest or worst moment often. Certainly some people were not looking their Sunday best. So again, I always use the brave. These people were very brave because they don't know what our intentions are or what's going to happen to them or how they're going to react to what's going to happen to them. But that's also what makes Justice USA so unique is the approach. And that was the
Right.
approach.
Yeah, I agree. And I also thought it was striking. Um, One of the things that you had on screen that people could read that at any particular time, there's approximately 1,500 to 1,700 people in the Nashville jail system. Now that's less than, or it's about a 1/1000th of a percent, I think, when I did the math on it. But that's still 1,500 people. That's a lot of people, period. So uh, the wheels of justice move slowly, but the uh, arrested people, the suspects, arrive on a regular basis. So, how did you see the justice system itself, whether it's from the intake, from the court system, etc.? Did it seem to move smoothly? Was it sometimes fast, sometimes slow? We've addressed some of the things that were particularly slow, but did it ever seem to be efficient, or was it always like lagging because of the volume of people coming in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the 1,500 to 1,700 number, though, remember the majority of those people are not convicted of anything. They're in jail. And the reason they're in jail, the majority of them, is because they can't afford to get out. So that's one thing that I think you recognize. Like there were people of means who came in and depending on the charges they had, bonded out immediately, had somebody who could afford to pay their bail or, had somebody who could go to a bail bondsman and get that bond. So, incarceration in Nashville, the majority of the people we saw were what you would call indigent defendants or people who couldn't bond themselves out. Now, obviously, Teresa did and some other people did, but that was something that you see. Does it operate efficiently? Yes and no. I mean, one of the things that you see in the documentary that if you're not paying close attention, you might miss is that the defense attorneys and the DAs work very closely to dispense justice. I mean, most cases are solved without ever seeing a judge intervene. Their plea agreements. There are other programs in Nashville like pretrial or the behavioral care center where if the lawyers agree, they can kind of push somebody into a different avenue. There is a drug court there, there's a mental health court there. There are all kinds of programs that Nashville specifically is trying to implement to really keep people out of the system who really don't need to be there. And obviously, even with the best intentions, you don't always have the best outcomes. But yeah, there are lots of inefficiencies. I mean, that's just the way it is when you have people running a system and you have, public defenders who have massive caseloads and DAs who are working lots of caseloads and judges who, have limited um, time to do all of these cases. It's just there's a backlog, there was COVID, there's all kinds of factors that played in.
Yeah. And I also thought tied into the bond was Zachary's mom, and when she went to meet with the bail bondsman, I was so shocked that they A met at a McDonald's and then B signed the paperwork on the hood of somebody's car, hers or his or a random person in the parking lot. But the lack of formality of that process to me was pretty striking. So what, as you guys like, why did it happen that way?
Well, I have some really good stories about that because that was really, really interesting to me as well. Just something I wasn't expecting. You go down to a bail bondsman's office, you know, they look like they look on TV. I mean, they do in Nashville. But no, Teresa, Zach's mom, called us, let us know that she had secured the money. She didn't have it herself, so she had to borrow it from friends. She had to put up her retirement for collateral. And she's like, I'm gonna go to Florida to get him out. And we're like, all right, we're coming. And she's like, so I found this bail bondsman, and myself and one of my DPs, Sterling, are in the back of that car thinking to ourselves, like, we hope she's not being scammed. Honestly, like we did not know until we pulled up to the McDonald's and there was a person there who was not there to kind of rob us. Or, I mean, anything could have happened. She wasn't a native to Florida, so she found some guy on the internet who happened to be legitimate and very helpful for her and really broke the process down for her. But yeah, they met in a McDonald's because that's what he suggested. He's like, let's just meet in McDonald's, get this paperwork signed, and the whole way through, I'm like, when is the other foot? When is the shoe gonna drop? Like, where is this gonna go bad? And it didn't. And it's fortunate for Zach because, he is a person with his mental health issues that the longer he's in jail or he was in jail, the worse his condition was gonna get. And so it was imperative that his mom get him out, and she kind of risked it all to do it.
Yeah, and that shows the level to which a lot of people in Justice USA put themselves on the line for to help their family members. And one thing that I thought was particularly striking from or not the law enforcement, but one of the judges, Sheila Calloway, had said that the more a child has contact with the criminal system, the more likely it is to remain in the criminal system. And you had also mentioned, and it's in the show, Justice USA, that 70% of the cases are diverted to positive programs in the community, and that of those 70%, only about 4% come back into the criminal system. So now that you're very familiar with the Nashville legal system, criminal system, court system, what are they doing right to that the rest that could be extrapolated and applied to the rest of the country, in your opinion?
Well, I think, it's interesting. Davidson County, as I mentioned, has a lot of programs and they're trying a lot of things. There are other counties in Tennessee that are nowhere near as rehabilitative or restorative. And I think, Judge Calloway, you just have to kind of love someone like that who, is limited by what she could do by the law, but tries to do everything she can for those kids and genuinely cares. And I had the fortune of meeting her on a previous series that I did with Soledad O'Brien. So I knew Judge Calloway. And so when I knew we were going to go to juvenile, I was really excited about it because she's an elected official, but she really, really cares. And so, back to the whole juvenile situation, there are a couple examples in the series of things that people can do. There's a gentleman named Cameron who was involved in an armed robbery and was put into a program, and it's really changed his life. And I just saw him last week as well, and he's doing really well, and he's a spokesperson. So, there are positive outcomes if you believe that criminals or people who are being called criminals, children, juveniles, adults, whatever, are redeemable. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be, punishment for crimes. I'm not even trying to make that political point. I'm just saying that if you have kids who are incarcerated, they are kids. The brain science tells us they're not adults. So if you believe that they're redeemable, then you put them in the programs, you tend to have really good outcomes. And one thing I'll say about juvenile, we have some really serious offenses in justice in the juvenile cases. There's firearm possession and there's murders. I mean, so that's about as serious as it gets, and you might be misled to believe that that's what's going on with Nashville's youth. And Judge Calloway would be the first person to tell you, like, it's such a small percentage of kids who are actually incarcerated. I mean, during the time we were filming, there were maybe between 30 and 40 kids in detention, and those are kids who can be detained because, as you learn in the series, there's only certain offenses you can detain kids for. They try to get them into these community programs. So, Nashville has a problem with kids breaking into cars and stealing guns because people leave their guns in cars. They've been trying to, yeah, it's mind blowing to me, but they've been trying to get that to stop because look, if kids break into a car and steal a gun, then they have a means to commit another crime. If they never get that means, then anyway. So that's one of their big initiatives. Anyway, this long drawn out answer is to say that if you think kids are redeemable and you put them in programs that work, they do not come back into the system. And that is a huge thing.
Absolutely. And given that the series, Justice USA series on Max, make sure to watch it if you haven't already, is very heavy subject matter. One of the things I appreciated is some of the little sprinkles of humor, like Lindsey Graham, public defender, her nickname or whatever on her name tag, I thought was hilarious. People check that out if you missed it or watch it. Pay attention for it when she's introduced. And then also you show the some of the inmates laughing or playing cards and different stuff. So why was it important to kind of sprinkle that in every now and then?
Well, I think, one of the questions that we always get, even while we're filming, like, aren't you afraid? Aren't you scared? Aren't you worried they're going to attack you? And, these are human beings. Yes, they're in conditions that aren't the best. And they're still human and they have fun and they would joke with us and they would be themselves around us and they would be silly and it's the human condition revealed in extreme circumstances. And so it was important to show that. I mean, we could have cut together a bunch of menacing looking faces. I mean, one of my favorite shots, there's a gentleman who's got tattoos all over his face and he's just kind of like grinning, like nicest guy on the planet, right? It's just it was about disarming people with the humanity of these people that they were seeing on the screen, because so many times you see programming where it's like, oh, jail fight, stab him with a shank, making pruno in the toilet. Like, that wasn't this series. We wanted to show the humanity of all of these people that we were meeting because we saw the humanity in them in the flesh. Like, it was just a function of seeing it and wanting to show that. And one of the really cool things we captured was in one of the more maximum security jails for the men, there was a graduation and they had it on Zoom so the inmates' parents could watch the graduation. And there was a lady there who runs education for Davidson County and she gave this really great speech. And it's like you got to step back. You're like, "Wait, I'm in jail with grown men who are graduating from high school," which was something that they pushed. I mean, they would go into the cells and say, "Hey, do you have a GED? Do you have a diploma? Oh, you don't? Well, don't just sit here and waste time. Why don't you do our school program and get educated?" So things like that were heartwarming to see, and the humanity of people who were suffering was also heartwarming to see.
Absolutely. And given that it's so human, what made you guys not want to use a narrator?
I think Marshall from the beginning was dead set against a narrator because that brings in a perspective when you have a narrator. I mean, you're gonna have to write that, and what are you gonna write? And no matter what you write, it's gonna have the impression of an opinion. So I think obviously, look, as human beings, we have our own baseline opinions about things, Marshall and myself included. But we really our North Star was to put that to the side and say, "Let's just film it, and whatever happens, happens, and we'll show it and be accurate and truthful and have integrity," and that's what we did. So, yeah, the decision was made very early not to have a narrator.
Okay. Well, there it is. All right. Well, Randy Ferrell, thanks so much for coming through the Unique Access. Do you have anything else you wanted to add or things I didn't ask you about?
Yeah, I would just say, it is intense subject matter and people may be turned off because of the intense subject matter, but I think it's really important. It's educational. It's also entertaining and you really do feel for these characters and you root for them and you want to know what happens to them. And we were blessed by the Oprah Winfrey Network to have the time and the finances and resources to follow them for such a long time. And it's just a unique thing, and I hope everybody checks it out. I appreciate being able to talk about it.